Tonight on The Late Debate, taking on the trolls, the veteran backbencher from Barking, Margaret Hodge, on how the government should tackle online abuse.
I'm regularly called a Zionist stooge, a Zionist bitch, or a swastika is appropriate as Israel is a fascist state.
Plus, a year since Boris Johnson won the general election, Uxbridge businesses report back on how their MP is running the country.
Knee-jerk reactions, short-term thinking, no real plan to follow. So if I had to sum it up in one word, I'd say I'm disappointed.
Good evening. Now, the Barking MP, Margaret Hodge, knows a thing or two about running campaigns and winning them. This week, she's launched another one to take on online anonymous trolls by targeting the internet giants, as she explained to me in this exclusive interview.
Well, when Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party and anti-Semitism started finding its way from the fringes of the party into the mainstream, I started getting terrible abuse. And that is just pretty horrific, and some of them are horribly abusive. And
what sort of things are they saying?
Well, I'll read, if I may, some of the awful stuff. So, for example, why has half of 1% of our population got so much power? Rid us of this cancer. I'm regularly called a Zionist stooge, a Zionist bitch, or a swastika is appropriate as Israel is a fascist state. And they mingle the fact that I'm Jewish together with the fact that I'm a woman, so there's a sort of mixture. The women get much more abuse, particularly online, than men, and the fact I'm old, so I'm not very often some old hag, bitch and a hag or something like that. And what it is, it feels sort of, if I can describe it, it's almost Orwellian.
What effect does it have on you?
Well, I mean, I'm tough. I've been around politics for a very, very long time, but it's demoralising. It tears you apart. But I think that's what the abusers want. What I feel is they're trying to silence you.
Have you ever come close to resigning, giving it up?
On the back of the abuse, I'm tired of it. I'm tired. But I'm also a fighter. I think probably I've built that reputation through my years in public life, and I think it's unconscionable, it's intolerable, and it'll put off, the next generation from coming into public life. So I want to rid us of it.
The government is bringing in legislation, the Online Harms Bill, but you don't think it's moving fast enough?
Well, I don't think anybody thinks it's moving fast enough. I mean, that was based on the death of a young woman, now some 4 years ago, 2017, I think, when she originally died on the back of, being influenced by stuff on Instagram in that instance. So it's a long time, and, they've had a consultation, they've had a white paper. And my fear is that if they're going to bring in legislation, they've got to take on these giant social media platforms, and my knowledge from having worked in the tax justice world over the last 10 years, that the government is always reluctant to take on powerful private sector interests like this.
The government says it is bringing in the legislation, it's just been held up by coronavirus.
When? I think you have to make the social media companies themselves liable. You've got to make them answerable and accountable for what they put on their platforms.
You presumably accept the principle of freedom of speech. Doesn't the right to speak freely also include the right to offend?
I think it includes, of course I accept the right for free speech, and I've supported whistleblowers, for example, in all my work in the Public Accounts Committee for 5 years. They were absolutely central to uncovering waste of public money and things going wrong in terms of how taxpayers' money was used. So of course I accept. But we also have laws about harmful abuse and racism and bullying and all those things. So you can have freedom of speech within the context of laws that also protect individuals from excessive harm.
A lot of this abuse, you say, goes back to your opposition to Jeremy Corbyn when he was leader of the Labour Party. Where did all that animosity between you and Mr Corbyn begin?
First of all, it goes back to the anti-Semitism. It doesn't go back to my conflicts with Jeremy. It goes back to the anti-Semitism. That's when it started. I've always been a Labour MP who happened to be Jewish, and with the anti-Semitism emerging in the party, my Jewish identity has become a sort of part of what I've become a Jewish MP.
Did you and Mr Corbyn ever get on?
I've known Jeremy Corbyn since he first became the MP for Islington North in 1983, and I was leader of the council in Islington. So we've always had a very civil relationship.
What will you do if he's readmitted to the Parliamentary Labour Party?
I'm fed up with him being at the heart of this debate, but the answer lies with him. I think what he has to do is accept his responsibility, acknowledge his responsibility as leader of the party. It all happened on his watch. He's got to accept in its entirety the report, and then he's got to finally not give a conditional apology, but give an unconditional, proper apology for the harm and hurt that he has caused to Jewish people.
By the time of the next election, you will have been the MP for Barking for 3 decades. Have you got another election in you?
Wait and see. I've got loads of energy. I'm very frustrated because of my age, having to be really careful at this time. But it's amazing how you adapt. I do get Zoom crazy. There are days where, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon where I think I've got to open the front door and get a little bit of fresh air. And then at the moment, with the nights drawing in, that's not much fun either. But I found new ways of working. I have coffee afternoons with my constituents regularly. I now do that online, and I was a bit worried how that would work, but even that works well, and I'm able to do quite a lot with them. What I can't do, and what I do feel frustrated about, is because of the absurd rules that we have imposed on ourselves, Jacob Rees-Mogg really being absolutely ridiculously undemocratic. I can ask questions, but I can't go in and participate in debates. I'm really cross with Jacob Rees-Mogg for stopping me doing the proper job of representing my constituents, which I perfectly well could do online, by the ridiculous strictures he's imposed.
Margaret Hodge, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
Margaret Hodge talking to me earlier. Now, Jeremy Corbyn, of course, was defeated in the December 2019 general election by fellow London MP Boris Johnson. But whatever plans the former mayor had for his first year in office, well, they were blown spectacularly off course by coronavirus.
The number of rejected ballot papers was 93, and I hereby declare that the said Boris Johnson is duly elected.
Boris Johnson was having a good night. He was re-elected MP for Uxbridge and South Ruislip and back in Downing Street with a big majority.
I believe, in fact I know, because I've heard it loud and clear from every corner of the country, that the overwhelming priority of the British people now is that we should focus, above all, on the NHS.
None of us knew then the role the NHS was about to play or how our lives would be turned upside down. In the Prime Minister's constituency, businesses were forced to navigate lockdowns, curfews and bans on households mixing. Lawrence runs a chain of bars and restaurants and had high hopes of Boris Johnson as PM.
What we've experienced is almost an opposite to what we thought was going to happen. Knee-jerk reactions, short-term thinking, no real plan to follow. So if I had to sum it up in one word, I'd say I'm disappointed.
Good morning.
Like any constituency MP, the Prime Minister is keen to support local business. Only this week, he was in Uxbridge with the Conservative candidate for Mayor of London. Last year, he opened a tattoo parlour run by Adam Grant, who thinks the PM struggled at the start of the coronavirus outbreak.
He is getting more of a handle on it as time goes on, but I think personally feel it was a bit of a rocky start, trying to get on board on how exactly to handle it, especially with businesses that are involved like ours. The creative industry, I think, was hit harder than a lot of industries.
A global pandemic might not be the best time to start a business. But it didn't stop Ali and Basha. They opened the doors of their takeaway in Uxbridge last week.
Everyone is like, why would you take the risk? And why would you just invest everything you have into this in this certain times? And it's like, it is a bad time, but people have to live, so can't do anything about it. We need to somehow sort it out. We need to start a business.
At the end of a year dominated by coronavirus, the Prime Minister must hope a vaccine will finally allow him to deliver on those election promises of 12 months ago. Joining me to look back over this unique year are Catherine West, the Labour MP for Hornsey and Wood Green, and for the Conservatives, the Chipping Barnet MP, Theresa Villas. Welcome both of you. Theresa, we heard mixed messages there from some of Boris Johnson's constituents. How many marks out of 10 do you give him for his first year as PM?
Oh, that's a very unfair question, but I'd give him at least 9 out of 10. I mean, these have been incredibly difficult circumstances, and he's led a government which has delivered the biggest economic support package in our country's history. It's been internationally commended. It's one of the most generous in the world, and it's secured and protected thousands of jobs, millions.
You seem to have forgiven him for sacking you from the Cabinet earlier this year.
Well, I haven't quite, but I'd certainly looking objectively at what he's done. There's a huge amount that's been achieved in spite of COVID, not least radical legislation and announcements on the environment, taking us towards meeting our climate change targets.
Catherine, even Labour wouldn't wish on a Conservative Prime Minister the crisis that Boris Johnson's had to deal with. Can you cut him any slack?
On the test, trace and isolate, no, because the reason we're about to go into, it looks as though, another Tier 3 situation is the failure to isolate the actual small number within the population who have got the infection. Because if we could do that successfully, and only 20% of the people who should be isolating are in fact isolating, and also that payment, the £500 payment, is not working. For people who are taxi drivers or who work in a bar or whatever, they should be being paid because they're in insecure employment and they're not being. So I just feel until we get that right, until we actually isolate people, I don't think we're going to get out of it. We'll just be going in until the vaccine, of course.
Theresa, do you accept the government has fallen down on test, trace and isolate?
There are certainly improvements to be made, but it's been a huge achievement to massively increase the number of tests being carried out. I mean, we're sort of well above the 500,000 mark, and that is from a start of around 2,000 tests a day. So there is more work to be done, but mass testing has demonstrated that we can get a grip on this virus. It is crucial that we do that.
It does look increasingly likely as though London is heading for Tier 3. Catherine, earlier today you were involved in a meeting with the Health Minister Helen Whately where you had a briefing along with lots of other London MPs. What was the message?
The message is 20% increase in most of London, which is, if we have low numbers in a borough, then they've gone up 20%. If we have high numbers, obviously 20% of that high number is getting out of control. Once again, coronavirus getting on top of us, when if we'd introduced the correct measures around isolating people who have got it, then we would be in a better place.
Did you get a sense from the Minister that Tier 3 is inevitable for London?
I got the impression that she's keen to introduce it as of next week, but we don't have to be here. We're really only here because we've wasted the month that we gave them, and we gave them all of the summer, and they wasted the summer. They wasted the month where we were all self-isolating ourselves, and now we're about to have to go into Tier 3 again because they don't seem to be getting the isolation correct. Only 20% of people who have got COVID are isolating.
Theresa, if we do go into Tier 3, the best guess it's likely to be next weekend around the 19th. For you, what do you make of Tier 3? Is it terrifying?
Well, I sincerely hope that we don't have to take that step. I think you're right. It's looking as if it might be on the cards, and that's a terrible hit for hospitality businesses. They've had such a tough time, particularly the so-called wet pubs. I think the government should have regard to their criteria about the capacity of health services. We've still got capacity in our health services in London to cope with COVID cases. It's not the pressure that we saw in the first wave. So I think that may be a way that we can stay out of Tier 3. I hope it is.
It's going to be a hard argument to convince the government to keep us out of Tier 3.
It will be, but certainly I would be urging ministers not to take us that way. London is the engine room of the UK economy. We need to keep it working in order to keep the economy going.
Well, the alarm bells were ringing again this evening when Matt Hancock gave a news conference in which he said that 7 London boroughs, mostly in the north east and Bexley in the south east, would now have to begin mass testing of all teenagers at school because the problem of infections rising was getting out of control. Let's hear what he had to say.
By far the fastest rise is amongst secondary school-aged children, 11 to 18 years old, while the rate amongst adults in London is broadly flat. But we know from experience that a sharp rise in cases in younger people can lead to a rise amongst more vulnerable age groups later. We've seen that happen before. So we need to do everything we can to stop the spread amongst school-aged children in London right now.
Catherine, is it time to give school-aged children, especially teenagers, a very firm message to behave because we're in trouble?
Teachers have been saying for weeks now in London, and we've all been doing Zoom calls with them, they've been saying, please, we're going to have to do something. It's getting worse. There's more children off. There's more teachers off. There's more teachers who are parents of children who are in other schools. But the government doesn't seem to have been listening. They could have put mobile testing into the schools months ago. Why didn't they do it from the 1st of September? Why are we in this position now? That's what I want to know. And I think the trust that we should have in a government is really being eroded because we're being sort of promised, if you go into tier 3, everything will be all right because we'll use that time to get the test and trace better, but they're not. It's still 20% of people, 80% of people who've got COVID are just walking around, not being told to self-isolate.
Infection rates in Barnet, which is your London borough, are going up. Are you concerned about the mixed messages from the government? On the one hand, don't go into pubs, but at the same time, allowing this flexibility of 3 families meeting over Christmas?
Inevitably, there are compromises in how the pandemic is handled. I think it's so important that people are allowed a bit of time with their families over Christmas. So I think there is a general understanding that the rules are relaxed just for a few days. It is, though, important.
Isn't there a real danger that that's just going to lead to another spike?
Inevitably, it will lead to some increases in cases because there's more social mixing. But I believe that it's important that people follow the rules over Christmas. It's not a free-for-all. There are still strict rules in place. And once the regular rules come back into force after Christmas, if we all comply with them, that helps us get through COVID more quickly. And it also means that we shouldn't have to go into further lockdown. The more we comply with the rules, the less likely it is that we face further lockdowns in the future and the more quickly we can all get through the epidemic.
Catherine, do you support the relaxation for families to mix over Christmas?
I do. I think people have worked really hard to do the right thing. It's the government that's failed to put in the isolation measures to keep that very small number of people, as I've said already, apart so the rest of us can get on with things. Instead, we're all mixed in together. So it's just going to grow and grow and we're out of control. And a government out of control, if you combine the triple whammy of Brexit, COVID and the climate crisis, we really are in a mess.
You've brought up the subject of Brexit. The year is ending as it began, with Brexit dominating headlines again. Do you trust the Prime Minister to deliver the Brexit you want?
Yes, I think I do. Everything he said to date is very consistent about how he wants to get Brexit done. He wants to respect the result of the referendum, and that means regaining control of our laws, our money, our borders and our fishing waters. Time will tell whether he delivers on that.
What compromises would you accept to enable us to have a free trade deal with Europe?
I mean, I think there are compromises to be done around the sort of principle that, we're all sceptical about sort of massive subsidies to industries and state aid. We actually have some quite similar ideas about that how to manage our economy. So there may be some compromises we can make in relation to that area, simply because the two sides perhaps want a similar result at the end of the process.
Do you have any optimism for a deal?
They've had 4.5 years and look where we are.
Well, to be fair, the Prime Minister's only been in office just over a year, so...
A whole year, and they've left it to, 2 days before the deadline? Typical. Look at how they've handled coronavirus, the highest number of people who have died. How on earth are they going to manage Brexit? And this morning, Mr Raab said on Radio 4 that he thought it was fine. There was probably going to be no price increases, even though the chief executive of Tesco said there would definitely be a 5% increase in the price of food. So more food scarcity. If we haven't got enough with food banks and with the whole children's crisis in food, we're going to have all of our supermarkets now putting price increases up. And how are people going to manage, particularly ones who have lost their job?
Do you recognise that picture that Catherine's painting of the chaos that might be coming down the road?
No, I mean, there'll be some disruption. You know, this is a major constitutional change we're about to go through. So deal or no deal, there's going to be some disruption in our ports, but we can cope. And there are huge opportunities for us as a country, as an independent trading nation once again, and we should seize those opportunities. We should be talking up our country, Catherine, not talking it down.
Are you talking it down?
Not at all. I'm being realistic about the crisis which many families face now, with the double whammy of the food crisis around food banks, the universal credit payments which have turned into debts for many families, and now the idea that supermarket prices will go up by 5%. The government is utterly complacent.
If a deal comes back that's not perfect, will Labour back it to avoid a no deal?
We probably would.
You'd be happy with that?
I'd much rather have a deal than no deal.
What about you, Theresa? Would you accept a slightly dodgier deal than ideal to have a deal?
Potentially, but I don't tend to decide how I vote on things until I read them. So I can't say in advance of seeing an agreement whether I would back it.
Do you get a sense that there will be a deal? Or I mean, you've got an inside knowledge as a former MEP, you know Brussels.
While the EU is very good at making deals, it is rare that one of their negotiations ends without some form of agreement. So I think it is more likely than not that there will be a trade agreement.
If it's a last-minute deal, are you prepared, both of you, to come back and sit over Christmas in Parliament?
It looks as though the EU is giving them a get-out-of-jail-free card, because it said we will allow planes, we will allow surface transport, we will allow a number of measures. And so I think the EU, as usual, it's ahead of the game. It's like a chess game, and we're looking at the move we're doing now, whereas they're thinking 3 moves ahead.
We've been offering them those kind of side deals for years. This is not just something the EU has dreamed up. The reality is they'd be crazy to not have aviation cooperation agreements with us, because they fly on our planes just like we do.
So why isn't the government accepting it?
Theresa, Catherine, I've got to shut you up. We've just about run out of time. That's it for the moment. At the end of a momentous year, thanks to all my guests tonight, Margaret, Catherine and Theresa. We'll be back in January to see what 2021 means for the political world here in London. Till then, good night and thank you for watching.